All right, and welcome to the Firebrand Pastor Podcast, the podcast where passion meets purpose in lively discussions on some interesting topics. And we've had a lot of interesting folks on our podcast, especially recently. And today, we certainly have an interesting guest. I guess guess just doesn't cut it, does it? Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, Scott, you're a brother,
Yes.
and not just a brother, but a brother in arms.
Mm,
And, we really appreciate you taking some time out today,
mm,
but we are going to talk about rural ministry.
mm,
And I'll tell you what, that is the backbone, I believe, anyway, that is the backbone of ministry because most churches in America, I would even say around the world, are smaller churches. We
yeah.
think of churches as mega churches with thousands or tens of thousands of people. And that's what we think of as a church, but really the backbone of our nation. And it's always been this way, as far as I know, has been the smaller church. And I would even say the rural church does a very important job in making sure that the gospel, that the word of God makes it to people out on the edges, which
Mm.
is essentially what rural ministry is. But Scott, before we get into that, would you just introduce yourself today? Just give us a little bit of background as to who you are, because I could sit here and give a bio and it wouldn't be nearly as interesting as what you would give. So feel free to share anything. And then I didn't tell you this beforehand. So feel free to neglect this part of the question. But I normally ask our guests, give one unique fact about your life after you give, everything
Mm.
that's gone on in your ministry and just kind of a rundown of that. Give us just one unique fact about yourself. I mean, you can do that at the beginning if you want, but
Yeah.
feel free to share.
Unique fact. Oh, I married my wife almost 38 years ago,
Mhm.
and she grew up in Major League Baseball. Her dad was the backup catcher. His name was Bill Plummer, backup catcher to Johnny Bench.
Oh,
She
wow.
grew up with the Griffeys. So Ken Griffey Jr. was a good
Yep.
friend of hers, and the Pete Rose kids, and
Wow.
all of them. So I'm married into baseball. I love baseball. I played into college, and then coached a lot. Coached my kids. One of our boys went on to play Major League Baseball. He's still in the baseball world. He's playing overseas right now, but played for the Giants and the Cubs, and did his debut in 19. So, yeah, most people don't know how entrenched we are in baseball, which is just an
Yes.
interesting fact about us. Yeah. So there's my interesting fact. We're a baseball family.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, I got to watch your son on TV pitch, and as I was watching the game, suddenly who should pop up on on the screen, and that was you and your wife. They actually showed you during that game.
it was terrible. They had a camera on us the entire game. Of
I
course,
know.
your son's making his debut, and every pitch you're nervous for him and hoping he's going to do well and not get hit out of the
He
ballpark.
did
And
well.
yeah, he
He
did. He had a good game, but
he did.
man,
That
it
was
was
a
just
good game. Yeah.
Dave Trebecki's right over to my right, and all these retired ball players and Hall of Famers were kind of sitting with them, and it was quite unnerving. But anyway, there's a little bit of fact about us. So
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I enjoyed seeing you guys up there, and I thought, because, talking about rural ministry, you guys don't get a lot of credit for that. It's a completely unglamorous job. So
well,
anyway, but
back to the baseball thing real
yeah,
quick, just to tie it to rural ministries. The boys were raised on a cattle ranch, on our cattle ranch.
okay,
And we hit pop flies in the pasture and pitched and did all of that because we were so far away from any baseball teams. We would drive an hour to an hour and a half just to get a practice in. So uh, rural ministries, here comes this little kid out of the middle of nowhere, and he ended up playing Major League Baseball. So I tell families, don't worry about it. If you're good, they're going to find you no matter where you're at.
Yes.
They'll find you. So, but yes, even in rural ministries in the middle of nowhere, one of our sons played professional ball. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, pretty interesting experience,
yeah,
and I know that's your fact, so I kind of
yeah,
stole the show there, but
that's okay.
I did enjoy that. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about your ministry,
Yeah,
how you got to that point,
yeah.
and just what that means.
That's it's. I love sharing this because I was 17-year-old and junior in high school at a Christian school in Redding, California, Northern California there. And there was a man named D. Chalandeau. I'll never forget him. He was a French missionary in Russia behind the Iron Curtain at that time.
Wow.
Uh, and he was a Bible smuggler and a preacher. And that the Lord had been working on me even from a young age when he saved me. I'd always had just a passion to share the gospel. As a little boy, I'd go up and down the street, share the gospel with neighbors, come back very distraught that I couldn't believe they wouldn't accept this incredible good news of salvation through Christ alone. And my mom always said, "You're going to preach someday," something. And I never really gave too much about it till that day on the my 17 sitting in chapel, and I remember just saying, "Okay, Lord, if that's what you want, I'll follow you." I was an athlete. Took a basketball, baseball scholarship into Los Angeles instead of going to Bible college. Trying to tell God, look, we're going to do this ministry thing, but we're going to do it through sports. And promptly broke my ankle the third game into sports down in college, and I had a
Mm,
long, long recovery. Finally got recovered, played a little bit, but just knew the Lord wanted me. So I turned in my scholarship, went home, and started going to a little Bible college in Northern California. What really hit me one day is I just didn't have a good mentor in my life. Had some pastors that I looked up to, but no one to really guide and direct me. And so there was a man, his name was Jerry Boyle. He's still alive. He's in his mid 80s. I still have a tremendous relationship with him. He coached me in basketball and baseball in high school. And he was always around. And I just remember him being the most godly man I'd ever seen. And I knew he was a pastor of some sort. He did something, but I didn't know what he did. I just knew I wanted to be like him. My father was not a spiritual leader in our home. And so one day, it was in middle of September, I got his phone number and I called him up. This is long before cell phones. This is around 42 years ago now. I called him up and said, Jerry, I don't know where you go or what you do on Sundays, but can I go with you? And he said, I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock in the morning. We have a church plant out in this farming area. And so he picked me up, and that was 42 years ago, a little over 42 years ago now. He picked me up, and he was a missionary pastor in rural areas, planting churches in places where nobody else wanted to go. And that set that bug, Bill. That got into my heart. Always had a little bit of cowboy in me. Just loved horses, loved the Wild West. My middle name is Wayne after John Wayne. I really, I, I had that in me, but I didn't know that the Lord was preparing me for that kind of ministry, and so I started running with him, and then eventually, just shortly after that next year, I met Gina. Told her I believed that God was calling me in the ministry. I wasn't sure where that was going to be, but that's what I do. And if you wanna get together, well, this is what I do. I teach Bible studies, and I go out in the middle of nowhere and try to reach kids and people for Christ. And she said, I'll go. And so she started going, and I was discipling her, and she was teaching the girls, and I was teaching the boys. We eventually got married. Jerry married us, and that was almost 38 years ago. And that just passion for rural ministries just continued to blossom. Eventually, we made our way to the very corner of California, just right after our first child was born, with four boys, and uh, we ended up out there in the corner doing a ranch boarding school with a church, with a desire to plant a church. And Jerry had just a desire to um, have a ranch where we could take troubled kids in, where we could help them, because he knew the ranch would straight really, ranch really does a lot of things for keep people, teaches you to work and responsibilities. Agriculture was deep in Jerry's life, and I loved agriculture. So we went up there. The school didn't make it. We reached some kids, had a couple of good years, but the school failed. And Jerry said, this was after me running with him for about, I would say about 7, 8 years maybe. We had been church planting in rural areas. And then he said, okay, you're going to stay here and plant your first church. And I said, okay, I don't think I'm ready. Still think God's got the wrong guy when it comes to that end of it. But if that's what you think I should do, I will. So my wife and I, we had one baby at the time, stayed there in Fort Bidwell in the corner of California, Oregon, and Nevada. And we planted our very, very first church. And that was many years ago. And that was just a wonderful thing. We spent 10 years in that church. God grew that thing from just us uh, to, in fact, it outgrew the little town it was in. We had a town of about 50 that it was in, and we got up to as far as 70, 80 people. People were driving hours away out in the desert, and ranchers that were from way out to come to church. And we did that for the longest time and just enjoyed it, raised our boys. We had a cattle ranch there. We ran cows, um, and uh, we just enjoyed it. The problem is I had never finished Bible college. Uh, Jared grabbed me, and he had another older missionary that I also helped too. They said, look, you don't need the schooling. We'll be your schooling. We'll be your seminary. And, I didn't know any better. I said, well, okay. And off I went. And they did. They poured into me. And they did a great job training me. But after 10 years in that church plant and it growing successfully, and we had 3 elders in that church, I just from studying, I wanted to know the word better, and I really wanted to learn my languages. So I was wrestling with all that, and I got a call from Steve Fernandez one day, and he said, "I want you to come down and preach at our church." And so he says, "I hear you have a burden to go to seminary." And I said, "I do. I've tried to go to master's, but I can't get my ranch sold." He said, "Well, let's pray that the Lord saw your ranch. I want you to come down here." And so I came down preaching the church, and he said, "Scott, I want to start a seminary, and I want you to help me do it." I said, "Steve, I haven't even been to seminary." He goes, "I know, but we're gonna, if you remember Steve, we're gonna do this. God has put this on my heart. We're gonna do this." And so I said, "Okay, I'll help, but I want to be the first student." So after 10 years, we needed to move closer to get the seminary going. So Steve and a host of other guys, we all gathered around as a board and laid out seminary, what it was going to look like. And that required me to move down to Cottonwood, California, which is still fairly rural. And we planted a church down below Red Bluff out in the area of Proberta, Gerber area. And we had about 10 families we started that church with. And I said, look, I'm going to go to seminary, and you guys are going to get to go with me, because everything I'm studying, writing, doing, I'm going to come back and preach it to you. And they thought that was a good idea. I don't know why, but they did. And so we did that for 3 years, 3 or 4 years, and and that was very rural as well. And we reached that community, and that church grew, and but we eventually had so many people coming from Cottonwood that we ended up moving the church up towards Cottonwood, and eventually, we grew it up and turned it over to two of the young men that also graduated from Cornerstone Seminary that were helping me by that time. And so I've had my hand in rural ministries, but eventually, I don't know. It's probably Steve's fault. I'd blame him. He's in heaven, so he can't defend himself. He says, "God, we got to get you. You've got to get into bigger churches. We got to get you close to the seminary." And so, I ended up leaving the rural churches for about the last 25 years. I've pastored several churches, large ministries, planted several seminaries, both here and overseas, and and so that's what we've been doing for 25 years. And then the last couple years of our ministry in Florida, the Lord began to burden me, Bill, about the rural ministries again. And
Yeah.
and I talked about, if you can go back and listen to sermon after sermon, even in the big churches, I always talked about the rural areas and the need for men to go there, nobody will go there. There's nothing out there, and so they won't go. There's not, they can't pay you. You got to go as a missionary out there, and we couldn't get anybody to go. And I think the Lord, kind of like William Carey. Remember, Carey wanted to go to India,
Yeah.
and he couldn't get anybody to go. So he finally said, "I'll go." And I think that's what happened to me. I eventually just got to that point where I said, "Well, I'll go." And Gina and I prayed about it. It was a huge decision, leaving a very successful ministry back east, but we couldn't get away from it. This is the burden to go be back in the rural areas, and boy, are we happy to be home. We feel home. These are our people. We ranched and farmed, and we know these folks. We know what they do, and so it is a joy. I have a passion for the rural areas.
Absolutely. And not to steal your thunder at all, because, we want to focus on you and the incredible ministry that you have. And it's bigger now. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I do want to mention, first of all, to those who are watching, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the comments section, because I'm sure that, Scott, you would be more than willing to answer any questions that anyone has. But with that said, I have a special place in my heart for rural ministry
Hmm.
because I are one.
Yeah, you are one, that's for sure.
And once again, I don't want to make this about me, because most of the people watching and most of the people who will pick this up on the replay know what Grizzly Flats Community Church is. So it's not an issue of explaining anything, but I think just for the past 13 years we have been here,
Mm.
and we've been ministering in Grizzly Flats at Grizzly Flats Community Church, and it hasn't always been easy.
No, your church
Obviously,
burned down.
yeah, the church building burned down, and in fact, we just had a groundbreaking
Praise
this
the Lord.
this past Sunday. Literally a groundbreaking, not like a groundbreaking event, but
Mm.
a groundbreaking
Yeah,
event.
shovels and everything, huh?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, and we took a shovel, and my son, who is incredibly talented at a lot of different things, took a can of spray paint and spray painted the head of the shovel, and made it look gold. And I
Right.
told everybody, "Yeah, this is a solid gold shovel." And of course, everybody laughed. But we had probably 3 times as many people there
Mm,
for the groundbreaking as we would on any given Sunday.
mm.
15 to 20 people is
Nice.
probably pretty average.
Mhm,
And I think a lot of rural ministries
mm,
go through those types of phases. We were much larger than that before the Caldor fire burned
mm,
everything down. But now it's 15 to 20 people. There are financial burdens and things like that. Let me just ask you this. The reason why I,
mm,
I make that comment is this. Over the years, obviously things probably got tight, things got a little difficult. Was there ever a time where, because of, say, financial issues, specifically, any times where you just went, Lord, is this really what you want me to do?
mm. Oh, absolutely. You know, I, I think at times, we will lean on our flesh and we'll be overwhelmed by the
Yes.
circumstances.
Yeah.
And
Even pastors.
even pastors do this, and we teach our our people, our congregants, not to do this, but we do it as well, and we tend to have that anxiety come up, and we forget what Paul said in Philippians 4 of learning to be content with little and
Mhm.
with great. And contentment with great is probably the easier side, but when it gets little, it is challenging. And
Yes.
then your effectiveness for Christ. I don't know too many pastors, at least that run with me and run in my circles, that we don't want to be effective. I mean, we want to win people for Christ. We want to glorify the Lord in all that we do and say, and we want to exegete a text correctly to proclaim the glories of our Savior. And yet, in the rural ministries, sometimes you don't see a lot of changes. You don't see new people come. You know everybody in town. You there's no new developments going where there's going to be people who are going to come in, and so it can be challenging, and it can be very discouraging at times to wonder if the Lord is going to save another person, if you'll ever get to baptize somebody and identify them in Christ publicly, and you worry about those things, and it's not for me. It wasn't because I was trying to get put on the map. I just so dearly wanted God to rescue people. I wanted to be a part of
Yes.
that. And yet we're not in a metropolitan area where there's people or new housing tracts being born, birthed and grown and built all over the place. It's the same. That guy stacks his hay in the same place every year. That ranch is,
Yes.
those 150 years of same family. Everything is the same. And so it can be challenging, it can be discouraging, but I think that's where our theology comes in. The reminder that Christ has not forgot us, and he's still building his church, whether we see it or not. And I think we have to just really hold on to those truths, Bill, because it can be challenging. And I think in my earlier ministries, I was in my 20s and early 30s in my first church, and oh yeah, I there was times I thought, Lord, am I the wrong guy? Am I not doing things right? And yet then all of a sudden he would save a family, and people start coming, and we'd see little spurts of growth. But it is challenging. Um, I think a lot of guys that are in the bigger church, because I've been there, I've seen, we had just came from a church of 1,000, and
Mm.
so we were spent our last decade doing that. We've seen that every day, every Sunday there was 10 to 20 visitors. I mean, people from all over the world coming into your church, and hearing you preach, and in getting to know them, and ministry going all over the place. And but that's not so out in the rural areas. And yes, that there are some times where you can feel alone. You can almost feel abandoned by God, but you're not. Your theology tells you he's not, but you feel like that some days.
Right.
So the real pastor can go through some of those waves.
Yeah, and that's the biggest challenge because in a bigger church, obviously, you have, like you said, a greater population to
Mm,
pull from in a metropolitan area. And in a rural area, especially like Grizzly Flats, it's interesting how much the dynamic has changed here.
mm,
Because before, there was a little bit of growth. In fact, Grizzly Flats was growing
mm,
quite a bit. People were moving up, they were building new houses. And Grizzly Flats is kind of a strange place anyway. It's basically a housing development out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the
mm,
national forest, El Dorado National Forest. And so it's got some unique dynamics because people who are retired move here, and this was the way it was before. And then when the fire ripped through, all growth completely stopped.
mm,
The town itself, the community, it's technically not a town, but the community itself shrank,
mm,
and we became much like other rural areas where there was just absolutely no growth. You don't really have a lot of weekenders that come up
mm,
anymore. That's what we call people who had their second home up in Grizzly Flats. And so
mm,
some Sundays we would have 50, 55 people. Most Sundays we had 40 to 45. We were a fairly small church, but I mean, we did well for ourselves because God was good and He rewarded the ministry. But now we're in that situation where we are almost literally rural in the sense that we have those rural dynamics again, where people don't want to come up here. All the trees are gone. Everything's
yeah,
burned down to the ground. We
mm,
have one tree on our property
mm,
where I'm streaming from right now. We have one tree left, and we
mm,
probably had 50 or 60 trees on our
mm,
on 1 acre of property. We had beautiful, beautiful mix of trees. That's all gone now, and so people just don't have the same intensity about coming up to Grizzly Flats, and so we don't have that kind of rotating crowd that was there that kind of filled in the blanks for us. Now it's just the same small number of people
mm,
from Sunday to Sunday to Sunday, and the the issue with that is you look out on a Sunday morning, you go, "Where is
mm,
everybody?" And then you realize this is everybody
yeah, yeah,
because there aren't that many people.
Yeah.
Um, obviously, we can see that you are not in your church office right
No,
now.
I'm sitting in my
It
pickup.
doesn't look anything like a church office. It looks like a car to
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
you travel a lot. So do
Yeah.
you find in churches, the churches that you visit, the churches that you minister to, do you find that kind of dynamic where there's kind of that stagnated growth that goes on and just kind of pushes on and pushes on? And is that an area thing? Is that a geographic thing? Is that an attitude thing? Or is it something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're fairly new here, so we actually have two churches. I preach in Jordan Valley, Oregon at 9:30. We have a service there. Um, and then at I finished that about quarter to 11, 10 to 11. We fellowship till about quarter after 11, and then we have a 35-mile drive
Mm,
to A Rock, Oregon, where we have our second church, and that church starts at noon.
right.
That church is full of ranchers. Everybody in the church ranches, so it really works good for them. They get their chores done in the morning and get
Yes.
cows fed and all that, and they come to church. The churches were pretty lifeless when we got here. There had been some older pastors through here. One was here, but he was retired and he had been kind of keeping the doors open. But the moment I showed up, in fact, I didn't even have my support raised yet. He was done. I mean,
Oh,
and him
wow.
and his wife were like, okay, we're done. We're so glad. And super sweet people. They love the Lord, but they were done. They had been retired for years in their late 70s, early 80s, and um, and were worn out. Their health was kind of shot, and so they kind of just said, "It's yours. By here's the keys." And we were still trying to raise our support, and in missionary work, you're always raising your support. But we just got in and just started preaching, and the Lord's just really blessed that. Bill, I don't know that I'm doing anything different, but our churches have gone for like 4 people to 40 people. And then when you have a town of 100 and 40 of them are coming,
Yeah.
I'm just like amazed. I like, wow, Lord, we have people coming from different faiths now, that I know aren't saved, but they're coming from Mormon faith or Roman Catholicism, and they're coming in and hearing the gospel and staying. Uh, so I guess it's hard for me to answer that because right now what we've seen it's not stagnant in any way. In fact, there's a real buzz in town about what's going on in our churches. In our
Mm,
AROC church, it's not a town, it's our church, a school, a two-room school, and a post office. Sitting just outside the church here in my pickup.
mm.
And there's nobody here but ranches. And so I would say half of this community comes to our church, and we're
Wow.
out of room in that little building now.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure what we're going to do there, but the Lord will provide. But so I think it's this. I just think the Lord is blessing, and one of the things, Bill, I think what changes the dynamic, which I didn't fully understand when I was younger in our first very rural church we did, is how important it is to be among the flock. First Peter 5, I mean, he says it over time. He says, Peter, this, bondservant of Christ, fellow elder. He's not the first pope of Rome. He puts himself at the level of all of the other pastor, elder overseers. He uses all those terms within the passage, speaking of the man, the pastor, elder, overseer. But then he says, be among the flock. And he says it twice in 3 verses: be among the flock, be among the flock. And uh, I did that in my first church, but I didn't realize the impact on it. And it really grew. Our church did very, very well, but I didn't realize that my mentor had taught me how to really love the flock and be above among them. Now I come back to the rural ministries after 25-year hiatus, and I'm older, thankfully a little more wiser in scripture. I'm much better shepherd now. um, God has given me even a deeper passion and love for people. And I just naturally, it's so natural for me now just to move into people's lives. And we did that immediately on scene when we got here, whether that was go to the school, which has, 30, 40 kids in it, junior high through high school. They have 6 kids on the basketball team. Everybody plays, sometimes 5. We'd go to every game. And here these people see his pastors watching our kid. He doesn't have his kids are all raised and gone. So we'd get in their lives and we would go see ranchers and pray for them and ask the Lord to bless their herds and their haying season. And I don't know, the Lord has just really blessed, I think, the shepherding aspect. He always blesses the preaching of God's word, but I think he's blessed the shepherding aspects of what we do. And so but I do remember those early years of ministry where we hit those lulls, and I'm sure we'll hit them here. It just the way it is, right? The Lord builds a church, and He decides when and the numbers, and that's all His stuff, right? We're faithful men, um, and I'm sure we'll hit that. But I do remember that, and I remember going down to like shepherds conferences, right? And you're down there with thousands of guys, and I would just kind of weep at seeing how many people and these guys just worshiping and singing, and the preaching was just outstanding. And I was so alone out there, and I was young, and I just didn't have the fellowship with other pastors because there was nobody out there but me. um and now I'm older. Now I know how to build those relationships, and so but boy, I do remember there with tears in my eyes at Shepherd's Conference, just saying, Lord, please save people. Please reach these people. I do love them. And I want to see them come to faith. And those were challenging times. And I think, Bill, one of the things that I think marks your ministry as well is this faithfulness. I remember driving to a little Bible study. We always have Bible studies that are out. Even here now, we have Bible studies that are so far out. They're 2.5 hours from where we live. You drive for 2.5 hours out in the middle of nowhere, find a little community. We have a Bible study going that's meeting in a school, a 2-room school out there. And then we drive 2.5 hours back. Um, I have little control over that. But I remember years ago just looking at that and going, Lord, you never asked me to build the church. In fact, quote Matthew, 16, 18, you said you would build the church. And I remember finding so much contentment in that, so much resting in that statement as a young pastor, realizing I didn't have to save them. I just need to be faithful. And Bill, I've watched you go through those challenging times. We've had those conversations of what you went through with the fire and health issues that your family has experienced, and the challenges of a community just emptying it out after a fire. And every Sunday, I think I can say this in your case, I know in my case as well, is you prepare. And Gina and I said a long, long time ago, we will preach to 1 or 1,000.
Right.
And that's what God calls us to do. Preach the word in season, out of season, whether you're big or small, whether you're going through challenges or not. Be faithful. Be found to be faithful. And it's maybe one of the missing ingredients in the American church today, where we see all the problems going on. They're faithful as long as the budget's being met, as long as the seats are full and all the things are happening there. But can you be faithful with 10 people or 15 or 20? In fact, we started with 4 in some of these churches here. And, uh, uh, you know, part of me, after being involved with all the big, large churches and all the big, large problems that come with big, large churches,
Yes.
um, I'm a little older now, Bill, 42 years in the ministry. I was loving the 4 people. To tell you the truth, and I felt like I could really shepherd them. And of course, now we're at 40 and 50 some Sundays in the church up north here, and just kind of amazed that almost half of our town is showing up to church, um, and yet I'm so thankful that I can be in their lives. I can be among the flock. And I think after coming out of the large churches, it was so hard to do that. So hard to shepherd those people and try to encourage elders to, hey, get out of your office, go be in these people's homes, go to their businesses, pray with them, be involved in their lives, and that was always a challenge back there. And so now I got a group I can really handle, and I've been in every one of their homes. I've been on their ranches. I've been to their kids' games. I've been to the hospitals. I really do enjoy that, and I think it's a mark that I give credit to the Lord that He's taught me how to be faithful and not worry about the numbers and the money and all the budgets and all those type of things. Just be faithful. Be faithful to the text, the preparation, and to the people. And that helps get by those laws. And again, we're God's doing some pretty amazing things here right now, and I'm sure in time we'll see laws. But I don't think I'll change, Bill. I think I'm going to open my Bible and study hard and learn new things, and then proclaim those new things to whoever God brings in those doors on Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. In a rural ministry like what you're talking about, those lulls do come, and I
Hmm.
think probably in our case, the situation is I don't want to say temporary because obviously there are cycles that ministries
Hmm.
go through. But it's difficult right now because, for instance, we're actually in our home.
Yeah.
We don't have a building
Mm.
for the church to actually meet in, and people say, they talk about, when are you going to build a church? I go, well, we don't have to build the church. The church is still here. It's
Yeah.
meeting in our home, 4777 Creekside Drive. Why don't you join us?
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
people normally, I don't say it in a snarky way, and I don't mean it in a
Yeah.
snarky way, but
Right.
people smile at that because they understand what I'm saying.
Mm.
But all of that to say, a lot of the dynamic I think that we're experiencing in our rural ministry is the fact that we don't have that one central place, that building. And face it, culture is made up of a lot of different things. One aspect is uh, is actual physical symbols,
Yeah.
and that building is kind of a symbol of the
Mm.
greater building that God
Yeah.
creates with His church. Christ creates with His church, building up that wonderful building of people together. And for us, I think the biggest issue has been they just don't want to come out to somebody's living room and sit
Yeah.
there and watch and listen.
Mm.
And like I said, when we had that groundbreaking, there were probably 3 times as many people who were at the groundbreaking
Yeah.
as at our service, and a lot of it a lot of those people were people who probably won't come to our church.
Mm.
Maybe they will, I don't know. I
Mm.
don't know how God works, but,
Right.
for us, I think right now, that's kind of a temporary condition, is
Mm.
just like you said, waiting it out and just waiting on the Lord to,
Yeah.
reward that hard work.
I uh, I think it's a product of the American church,
Mhm,
and the American church bought into the American dream, which is really not biblical.
mhm,
Um, and that prosperity type of thinking that, oh, God's going to give you this. If He doesn't,
yeah,
you must not be blessed, and so forth, like that sneaks into it. When you go around the world, and our ministry is fairly wide now. We've been on, I think, in every continent except Australia. And most of the time, we're in rural settings around the world.
mhm,
And the majority of places that I have gone to train men in don't have buildings. They may lease a building, or they meet on a lean-to on the outside of their house, or I mean, I've seen it all. Some meet
mhm,
in little hotels. Um, but you get over here, if you don't have a building, people won't come.
right,
And we're not a super hospitable nation anymore, where homes are open and people. And so when you go into someone's home, it's almost strange today because once that door is shut, there's such privacy now, and even if you go door to door and knock on people's doors, I mean, you got to go through ring cameras and threats and all kinds of things today because the American way of doing things seems to always make its way into the American church. The early church, Bill, I mean, they met in backyards and rooftops. They met at 4 in the morning at times because half the church were slaves and they had to be to work. The first day of the week was not a holiday. It wasn't time off. You had a master you had to report to, um, and yet in today's world, if we don't have the big church with a steeple on it and the great worship teams and sound systems and something for everybody in the family to have, um, then then I'm not coming.
Hmm.
And so here you are meeting in your home, doing the same things, leading people in worship, uh, preaching a well-studied, well-prepared message, loving on those people, giving the shepherd care that needs to be there, but it's in a home, and I feel uncomfortable. I'm not going there, and so it is challenging. But man, you get into China, all those underground churches are in apartment buildings and sing at a whisper, so the neighbors won't hear. And it and yet over here we have to provide so much to get people to come. And now there's threats, and so every once in a while a shooting happens, and so now we have security and we have all this stuff going on.
Yeah.
And we're like a major league baseball team, at
Hmm.
at church now. And
Yeah.
it's so hard to fight that trends and mentality that even gets its way into the church, and just be a church that, hey, the doors are open, come be with us. Yeah, we'll do our best to see if there's a bad guy coming, but we're here. This is what we do. We're the family of God. We meet, we feast on the word of God, and we love one another, and we learn to be like Christ. And it doesn't matter if we have a big church or small one, a building, and we meet in a tent or somebody's home. It is the church of Jesus Christ. It's been blood bought by our God and Savior. And it is the most precious group of people that ever gather for anything on this globe we live on. And yet it's taken for granted, and if you don't have all the needs, then they don't come. And so it's kind of a little heartbreaking where the American church has really landed in so many places. But here in the real churches, I mean, this church here, I'm sitting right outside of it. We don't have running water in this building. We have
Hmm.
an outhouse out back,
Wow.
and we're packed on Sundays. And Gina's largest Sunday school class out of the two churches is here in the smaller community, and so she teaches these children. Has tons of them in there, and we set chairs up most Sundays just to fit everybody in this. In
Hmm.
this, it's not a very large building, but um,
Hmm.
and and we don't have anything. We can't even give. We have bottles of water. I guess that we do in the foyer, little bottles of water if you want something. But there's no running water in the building,
Wow.
and if it's cold and hanging around zero, that outhouse is awful cold.
Yeah.
And yet these people come because they're family, and that's what we do. And so I think that's the hurdle, getting people to realize how precious the church is. It is
Yes.
the most precious thing on this earth, that God has done. It. I warn people, you may not like the church, but be careful.
Right.
Don't go kicking at it, and don't go causing problems and causing divisions, because Christ died for this thing.
Hmm.
It is his bride. And uh and you start thinking about how we love our brides, and how if somebody mistreated that bride, what we
Yeah.
would do. And the Lord has the ability to judge swiftly. And I warn people. I say, you may not like me, and you may not like my theology or whatever I am, but please, don't hurt the church. I For your own good,
Yes.
because it is so precious. And so, Bill, I think about your church and you guys meeting on Sundays, and we've had that conversation. And yes, a building, there those will be a blessing when you get that building built.
Yes.
And I'm sure God will use that building to draw people in that will hear your message that you have prepared from God's word. And without a shadow of doubt, I believe God will save people, and he'll use that building. But that building, that you already said correctly, is just brick and mortar and wood.
Yeah.
Um, the
Yeah.
church is those people who come and gather together and are these many members of one body, that this Romans 12:5 group of people, um, and move in accordance with each other, with Christ as the head. And that is the clear ecclesiological instructions of the scriptures: hands and feet and nose and ears and eyes and fingers, all moving together as one for the glory of the Lord. And that can be 15 to 20 people, it can be 50, it can be 1,500. And I've seen a few good big churches that be able to do those things together. But that's the body of Christ. And really do, Bill. I really look forward to you getting your building in, and I think the Lord will use those things. But hey, there's a church that meets in Grizzly Flat, and most of the world could not even find that on a map.
Yeah, right. That's
ours,
true.
ours as well.
Half the time I can't find it on a map, and I live here. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we're getting close to the bottom of the hour here.
yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you. You had mentioned, and you broached the subject, so we're gonna go there and maybe finish out our conversation here with this. You talked about going all around the world
Mm,
because your rural ministry extends beyond just where you are in Idaho.
yeah,
What does that look like?
yeah. Um, I'm not quite sure how it all got going. I think somebody heard me preach and invited me. I'm trying to think of the first. I think I went to Russia first, years and years ago. Um, and I went to train pastors in the rural parts of Russia, and I spent 2 weeks with those men teaching Christology and battling through some errant views of doctrine that they had. But these men were out there and they were serving in churches a lot like yours and I's, Bill's. They were smaller. Russia was still coming out of the heaviness of communism. They didn't trust the government. They were free to meet, but and that really gave me a burden for pastors outside of America as well. And then Steve Hernandez got a hold of me and he started dragging me around the world. And Tony Sinelli, those
Hmm.
two guys took me
Yes.
different places and introduced me to men that were training facilities. And so that has just continued. And I continue to do those things. Um, this year we'll be in several places. This year, another long-term guy up on the hill there with you was Paul Anthus,
Yes.
and Lord took Paul home, and before Paul died, years before that, he'd always tell me, Scott, if something happens to me, you got to pick up this ministry. Will you make sure it keeps going? I go, oh, sure, I'll do that. Thinking, no, Paul's going to be fine. Of course, God takes Paul home, and I end up with Compassion for Congo.
Right.
And
Right.
so we ended up, by God's grace, being able to continue that ministry. But it's very similar. We're in Lubumbashi, Congo,
Yes.
out, and we got 9 pastors there. And this year I'll be there training men. Phil Layton, I think you know Phil as well.
Yep. I
He's
do.
part of our board now. I created a board for that ministry. And Phil just got back from there. And guys like Ton Molina in Spain, who was also a graduate of Cornerstone. I go to his regularly. North Africa as well. Philippines, as you probably know, Pastor Nilo passed away here just recently, and but I've been there probably more than anywhere. And that's down in the southern island, most southern island, the Muslim island, and the jungle down there, and training pastors. I've been doing that for 20 some odd years now with Nilo, going every 3 years down there.
Mm.
And I think there's just a passion for those guys to get um, what we have so readily here. You may not be able to go to seminary, but you can get online and do it. You can order books and you can read them in your own language. Well, these guys can't. They don't have anything. They try to get enough food for that day. They live literally hand to mouth type lifestyle, just a daily substances that they try to gain. And God just gave me a passion for those guys. And so when somebody calls and says, "Hey, would you come over and do a module or train for a couple weeks?" Most of the time I say yes, and I end up around the world doing those things, and I really do enjoy it. I love it. I've been all over the Latin world, the Spanish world, the communist world. I've been in many communist countries, a lot of Muslim countries, a lot of places where I had to duck down in vans and just some little more dangerous areas. But there's those guys, they're there, and some of them are dying. And in our Sola Gracia ministry in the Philippines, we've lost several men over the last few years that were murdered and killed by Muslims. Um, and those guys, if they're going to do that and reach people that I can't, could I take a couple weeks out of my life and the comfort that I have here to go there? So I really love that part of my ministry. So
Mhm.
yes, we're doing rural ministries here. We love that. That's who we are. That's really kind of our DNA. We're back to what really fits us well, and yet I love the international ministry I have as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, because the church is on 2 fronts. It's obviously at home where the
yeah,
roots are,
yeah,
and hopefully those roots go down deep, but then, of course, no church is a church without some kind of missionary outreach to be
absolutely.
able to reproduce, followers of Jesus Christ by preaching the gospel.
Dr. MacArthur said a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, I remember him saying, and it really struck me. He said, "You're not doing church if you're not doing missions."
Right.
I mean, that is the mission of the church, is to do missions.
Yeah.
And I love that. I remember him saying that. I don't know if we were in a group or he was saying that to me or a smaller group, but it was such a statement that I just really struck me. And that's the great commission. That's what the Lord told his disciples in Acts chapter 1, when you get in verse 8 there, and he says, stop worrying about the kingdom. They're trying, hey, is this the time we're going to be restored and all that? Stop. That's me. You don't need to know about that. I'm going to take care of that. And he says, but here's what you need to do. You need to go to Jerusalem. No, they were right there, right?
Right.
Judea,
Local ministry.
little farther out, Judea,
Yep.
and then Samaria. Well, who wants to go to Samaria?
Yeah.
Philip did
That
eventually.
that's
You know,
rural ministry.
that's rural ministry and culturally challenging, right?
Right.
To the Jews, those were half breeds up there. They did not want to go through that. And he names it. So Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, a
Yep.
place most, the religious people don't want to go to. And then, Bill, he said, where you and I are at, to the remotest places on the earth.
Yeah.
And I think I stand in pretty strong statement here, good support. I think we've forgotten the rural areas as the American church. And because there's just no money out here, and so you don't have a big budget, you don't have any, and so it takes mission work, and that's not only here but it's around the world, and we've lost a lot of our rural areas. I mean, there's full-blown Mormon wards out here,
Mm.
Catholic cathedrals out here in the middle of nowhere,
Hmm.
but there are no Bible teaching churches except
Mm.
ours. I have no competition when it comes to,
Right.
other churches,
Yeah.
the other Christian biblical churches. There's nothing out here. I can go from one little group of people to plant. If I had 10 more guys, I could plant 10 more churches. People call me all the time. Would you come and teach a Bible study? Would you come? We want a church someday in our town. Nobody's here. And I just can't get to them all.
Right.
But
Yeah.
because God has, through many years now, raised up many supporters for us, we're able to financially do that now. And I think every church needs to have a Grizzly Flat part of their mission, part of their missions,
Mm.
or at A Rock Community Chapel, larger
Yes.
churches that say, "Hey, we will help financially support, so that guy can be free a little bit to study, so he can care for shepherd those souls that are out there," and I'm trying. That's one of my big pushes to get the bigger established American churches to think missional in the rural areas of America. They're forgotten, not by the occults. The occults haven't forgotten them, but
No.
they've been
No.
forgotten by the American church. And so I encourage pastors, think about find a rural church, find one that you guys line up and link arms with. Some of the best preachers, including yourself, I have heard are in these rural areas, and nobody knows about them.
Mm.
They're phenomenal preachers, phenomenal oratorical gifts. They're they're amazing men out there in a lot of cases. Now, on the other case, sometimes you find men that they have never got to study and they struggle along. But man, it's amazing what is out there. And if the bigger churches would say, hey, we're going to take on these smaller rural churches and help finance them a little bit, free that pastor up just a little bit so he isn't working two or three jobs and doing ministry trying to survive. Oh, he'll be a blessing. And our people would give testimony to that. They would say, we're so blessed to have Pastor Scott here because he pours his life into us. If you asked our members of our churches, that's exactly what they would say. And
Mhm.
that's because God's people have freed me up to be able to be a pastor to them and to be in their lives. And so, I hope the American church would respond to that. And I'm doing my best wherever I go, wherever I preach, to just make sure I put that plug in for the grizzly flat churches
Yeah.
of the world.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. We appreciate the fact that we're not forgotten up here.
Yeah.
We're not the end of the world, but you can see it from here. So, but
I've used that
anyway,
statement myself.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, just about anybody in rural ministry can say
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, as you were talking, my brain just thinks in ministry terms.
Mhm.
Some of these people, some of these pastors, they have this business model mentality of the church, and that's just not me. But as you
Mhm.
were talking, I will say a business idea popped into my head because the cults being out there and taking on
Mhm.
rural ministry. That's I'll tell you what, we are missing out on a huge opportunity there because
Yeah.
it's almost like Kmart. You remember
Mhm.
Kmart was just
Yeah.
massive
Yeah.
back in the 70s and the 80s, and I mean, Kmart was synonymous
Mhm.
with, retail.
Yeah.
There really wasn't anything else,
Mhm.
and, suddenly Walmart sweeps in and becomes even bigger than Kmart, but they didn't become bigger than Kmart by competing with Kmart. They went out to these rural areas, to these
Yeah.
areas that didn't have Kmarts,
Mhm.
and they established Walmarts, and they ended up having a much greater influence on the
Mhm.
population just working
Yeah.
from the outside in.
Yeah.
I think that's a great illustration of how we, nothing to do with business, obviously, that's
Yeah.
just an illustration. But we as ministers, I think sometimes we put the cart before the horse
Mhm.
because we think, okay, we need to go to a big population hub and we need to, start a church there. And well, you're working in a town that has 20 or 30 churches already,
Yeah.
and about half of those actually preach the gospel. And so
Yeah.
you've got this competition that's going on. When
Mhm.
in reality, a lot of God's people live in rural areas because
Yeah.
they don't want to be
Yeah.
in the city. They don't want to be in urban
Mhm.
areas and suburban areas. They don't want to raise their kids there. They want to be
Yeah.
a part of something that is actually wholesome, not
Yeah.
just the culture. Obviously, the
Mhm.
culture is, but also the surroundings themselves, the geography of it.
Right.
So, as you were talking, I was just thinking that's
Well, Bill, we have a Mormon ward in our town in Jordan Valley, which is only 100 people. There's a Mormon ward. There's no way they built the building they built from the funds there.
right.
That was funded
Yep.
from the LDS church to build that beautiful building in those beautiful grounds. That didn't come from here. That came from them they had a vision to put something there. We have a little
Mhm.
cathedral. It's a Catholic church. But it's a cathedral. The architectural design is incredible.
Mm.
Well, somewhere Rome decided to put that thing here,
Yeah.
and they wanted it in these rural areas, and so the occults and the false teaching of many um, religions, they have the vision to get out here,
Mm.
and there I can go on more without stepping on too many toes. I can go on to more of that borderline stuff um, that really isn't in line with us in a lot of
Right.
ways,
Right.
and they're out here, and so I think it's just a missed opportunity of the American church. And again, unfortunately, so much stuff comes down to money,
Yes.
and people tell me, "Oh, we'd like to support you and like to be a part of that. Our just our budget's so tight." And but you know, uh, we trust the Lord. He's still building his church out here, but
Yeah.
I've been to big budget churches and the massive staffs and all of that, and small budget for missions. And I just think we get that backwards. We need to be training volunteers in our largest churches so that those churches have the ability, because they do have the populations that are in the metropolitan areas, to really be able to reach and do things with that money that um, they could be a part of the building of God's, kingdom in a way that's just incredible. But so often those things just got eat up in day-to-day budgetary issues. So anyway, it's just something I've learned over the years, and even in our little teeny churches here, we're supporting missionaries.
Yeah.
And we make enough money to keep the lights on and those type of things. But I said, look, we have to support missionaries. We have to support the gospel, and they're all for it, and they'll give more when I ask them to.
Yeah.
So I think this is the big need, and probably an issue that the American church is kind of a little bit blind to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time that you've given to us today to be able to talk about this very, very important
Yeah,
issue, and one obviously that's close to my heart.
yeah,
But
both of us.
just appreciate the fact that
Yeah,
you gave us your time. Thank you. And if you don't mind sticking around afterward, if we could just talk for a couple minutes, and just kind of connect afterward.
yeah.
So stick around. Don't don't
Okay.
don't don't leave. But
Yeah.
I do want to talk to those who are watching and listening today. This live stream is a labor of love. We produce this free of charge, but I will say it does cost money to be able to do this, because this really cool StreamYard uh, platform that we have here costs a lot of money to be able to do. That comes out of our pocket to be able to afford that. So if you are out there and you want to help out with this ministry and help out with this podcast, feel free to go to our website. It's formerfirebrand.com. And up at the top, you can see a donate button. And if you get on that website, you'll see it's not commercialized. It's just content. But we do have that donate button up there. If you don't mind clicking that and going there, if you want to give, feel free to give. But that is not necessary. This is, like I said, it's a gift of grace, a labor of love. And so we want to make sure that we bring you these wonderful kinds of conversations. This is called Conversations with Firebrand Pastors. And once again, Scott, thank you for
Mm,
being here today.
very
Really
welcome. Thank
appreciate
you
it.
for having me.
Yeah. And so thank you all for being here today and joining us for the Firebrand Pastor podcast. Until next time, may God bless you.